And so we have an incredible panel here today. We will have Rukmini Reddy, who is SVP of Engineering at Slack, Amit Prakash, who is CTO and co-founder of ThoughtSpot, a next-gen analytics cloud company I'm sure many of you are familiar with, also a Sapphire portfolio company, and Gil Feig, founder of Merge.dev, a unified business apps, API, and integration platform. And moderating this panel will be my Sapphire Ventures colleague, Casber Wang, who is an investment partner with a firm who does a lot of infrastructure investing. In 2020, Business Insider actually recognized Casber as an enterprise VC rising star investor. And for those of you who know Casber personally, you'll know that not only is he an investor, a rising star investor, but he's also a very, very passionate company builder who cares very deeply about partnering closely with his companies to build for success, and who cares very much about the future of the engineering ecosystem. So with that, I will let you take it away.
Hey, mic check. So thanks, Shruti, for the kind words and introduction. I mean, I know a lot about how to measure salespeople, but obviously not nearly as much about engineering productivity. So we have a really good panel here with, I would say, companies of different sizes across from, Merge, Gil, early growth, ThoughtSpot, obviously growth stage, and a company that you might have heard of, Slack. It's obviously, a bigger engineering organization. So maybe just to kick off, let's talk about the role of metrics, right? There's obviously all kinds of metrics, and metrics is such a loaded word. Maybe, we can start from Gil. Like, how do you think about metrics and the role of metrics, within your team?
Yeah, so I think when we think about metrics internally, we are looking at, trying to measure productivity. In that sense, it's a tough thing to do because we can look at things like number of PRs pushed or lines of code touched or a million other sort of metrics using a lot of the cool tools that are out there. But obviously that doesn't paint the full picture, especially at a company of our size where we're growing really fast and we have to support our customers and we have people who get pulled off production issue, pulled off, major tasks to go work on customer-facing production issues that can ultimately convert, a ton additional customers. So we have to look at everything with a grain of salt. That being said, I think it's a good proxy, and we do look at metrics somewhat to measure our productivity.
Cool. Now, Amit?
So I think the best thing to do with metrics in the engineering productivity context, I think, is to measure teams, not individuals. So I think the mistake that often is made is that you start looking at like individual number of PRs or number of lines or number of bugs fixed. And that's really a terrible thing to do because you're essentially disincentivizing collaboration. And I think the way the high-functioning teams work is that your star performers, your star engineers are actually best utilized by helping everyone else. So what you really want is to measure at team level and see how well the team is functioning together and how well they're producing and where there may be areas of improvement.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think metrics are just data, and it's 50% of the story. And the other 50% is, I think, context. So using metrics as a leaping point from which you actually can enable conversations. I actually think of metrics as conversation starters. You use data to ask a question, and then your question's rooted in data, and you can kind of have a conversation based on that. Engineers mostly hate productivity metrics. We all know that, right? Like, they hate it. So I think that's why the context is really important, and I couldn't agree more. I don't believe in measuring individual metrics. You're only as good as your team is, and to create a culture where people can thrive, it's super important to look at the big picture across the board.
Cool. And maybe let's start with the most pure form of kind of engineering metrics, right? Flow, velocity, MTTR, and all that stuff. I'll take this up. Maybe Amit, you can talk about the velocity and flow metrics. What's your view on that, and how do you think of the key sort of flow metrics that you guys use at ThoughtSpot?
So I think one way to measure how innovative any organization or any company is to measure how quickly can you go from an idea to touching the customer, right? And I think that tends to be a really important metric. And I think that's kind of, when you talk about metrics, it's really important to have kind of a pair of them. One is the leading indicator, and the other one is kind of your real objective. So your real objective is to measure how quickly can you go from start to finish of an idea cycle. But then there are a bunch of other things in the middle that are easy to measure and tell you how things are going, but not necessarily are the final objective. So things like how long does it take for someone to push a change and get it reviewed, I think is a really important thing for a team to measure. If that thing takes too long, then the chances are people are really frustrated about it, and there's some change of culture that's needed. How long does it take when you submit the code to you get feedback from the system that you haven't broken anything? If that thing is too long, then too many, either you're serializing too much and you're losing throughput, or there's too much confusion around when something breaks, what caused that break to happen. So those are some of the things that I would prioritize. Is probably a long list of other things that is worth measuring, and we do. But I think in the interest of time, I would go with those two.
Yeah, makes sense. Maybe as a follow-up for, Rukmini, you brought up the fact that no engineers wanted to be measured on, sort of metrics or big brother watching you behind the back kind of thing. When you talk to your team, when you talk to your engineers, when you present a very set of, let's say, pretty objective metrics, right, from GitHub or from one of those tools, how do you handle that pushback, or how do you kind of prevent that pushback in the first place?
I think it all starts with the foundation of trust that you set up in the team, default, right? So something I've done in the past is, it's a culture exercise I start with. I ask us to come up with our own values, and I crowdsource them. Is great. And then we talk about what are our architecture values, what are our values to build, what are our product values, and that kind of aligns everyone on like what we want for ourselves in a team and in an organization. And one of the things we have in my team is we say, we are going to measure ourselves, and we're going to be honest with ourselves, and we are going to use it to look ourselves in the eye. Now, that's a foundation I have. I agreed, got buy-in from everyone up front. Now, if I go back and be like, our cycle time sucks, like it's 75 hours when the industry benchmark is 24 hours, people don't feel like Big Brother's watching. They get more curious, and they're like, oh my God, what can we do to change that, right? And you said something about remote work has changed the way we code and the way we measure productivity. So another thing we've started to measure for collaboration is one of our core values. And the one we measure is merge time and how long it's taking for you to help a colleague. And when you approach it that way, versus like, what were you doing? Like, where were you for the last few hours? Instead of that, you're like, your colleagues are depending on you. How do you show up for them? How do you show up for your team? And we actually have focus time for 3 times a week. We set 4 hours aside. So very tactically, we set time for you that are not filled with meetings, so you can complete your PR merges and move the organization forward. So you have to back it up with action. You just can't say words and then not make changes to the way you do business.
Any thoughts, Gil?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I think we've even seen that our teams, when they're not being productive, they sometimes recognize it before we do. And that comes up in retros, that comes up in a million different ways, one-on-ones. But we work with our teams to actually help define the metrics together that we're going to approach improving. And it's like Rukmini mentioned, it doesn't feel like Big Brother's watching if everybody's in agreement from the beginning that these are the things that we're trying to tackle together. And so if we don't see those improving, hey, we all agreed up front that those were the things we wanted to tackle. So continue to pivot and figure out how we're going to improve those metrics.
Cool. And the other thing, Gil, we're just chatting about is sort of, how do we engage engineers by kind of presenting them, just tie back engineering metrics with real business metrics, right? Like, hey, does your work actually contribute to the product? To that point, we'd love to just hear a little more about, what you guys are doing at Merge, and what are some things that you find very effective?
Yeah, so I think one fortunate thing about being early growth like we are is we're still, I would say we're approaching quite a few deals, but there are not that many that are extremely high contract value, and engineers can definitely contribute directly to those deals closing. And so basically with every deal, posting that in our Slack and having the sales team very aware of who's helping close those deals, tying in, thanking engineers, really directly showing the effect that they're having on our bottom line is huge. We're able to do that at this size. It's something we're thinking actively about how we're going to scale as we continue to grow. But I would say that's one of the biggest ones. Also just measuring impact in terms of reducing churn or upsells, focusing, getting everyone really aligned. We have constant trainings on what all of our business metrics mean so that everyone's able to understand how they are directly impacting them.
Cool. And any thoughts, Amit, on this point, on business metrics, specific products within ThoughtSpot perhaps, that you tied, engineering metrics to?
So one of our cultural values as a startup has been that in addition to everything else that people get from working in a startup, they should get a good training in how to build their own startups when people are kind of done their tour of duty and they want to do something else. So we have an extreme transparency culture, and everyone gets to see almost every metrics. We use ThoughtSpot for all our analytics, and pretty much everything inside ThoughtSpot that can be measured and seen is visible to everyone. And so people care a lot about metrics, and one of the things that I've learned is that engineers love data. And they go and ask lots of detailed questions about everything, and they care a lot about it. And they care about the subjective picture. They also care about the objective picture. And so people, before me telling, people will be coming and saying that, hey, what can I do to move the ARR? And things like that. I think some of what Gil described happens at our stage, where a particular individual or a team will work on specific feature that causes us to close a deal. But as you grow, it's not necessarily a good thing. You really don't want engineers to be working on closing specific deals. So one of the things that we have done, which I don't know if it's unique, but it's definitely worked well for us, is that for every granular feature that we have in the product, we measure engagement levels there. So we can see sort of daily active usage of how many people are using the drill anywhere functionality in ThoughtSpot, how many people are using the automated AI-driven insights in the product, how many people are using the search capability of the product. And we look at sort of daily, monthly, and each team is incentivized to actually get those numbers as high as possible. And so that's been a good way to kind of connect the work people are doing with business metrics.
Yeah, makes sense. And Rukmini, I'm assuming that at an organization like Slack, right, obviously thousands of engineers, it's a little harder to do what Gil does and tie it back to a specific feature or specific customer win. How do you do it?
Actually, what you just described, it scales with Slack, the product itself, right? Because we have a thread called the Awesome Sauce Time. That's literally what it's called. It's Thursday evenings, and it's essentially a cross-functional shout-out. It's everything that's good about the world, thread of celebrations. Like, you helped 5 customers today by fixing a bug, or you helped us land this feature, it's shipped today. And there's a lot of that, but we also have rituals that we've developed as the organization has grown. One of my favorite rituals at Slack is what we call the Monday meeting. And this meeting is essentially a 30-minute PD leadership where we show up and we discuss the top metrics that matter for the business. We use OKRs and what have we committed to this quarter. And obviously resilience, security tickets, things like that are top of mind because a reliable service is the most important service that you can provide your customers. So we start there. And then we go into scorecards. For example, I run Slack's platform, and we are re-envisioning our platform right now. And we have scorecards for something we're building. And that is what we present to the rest of the company. But when we come back to our own team, I write a weekly digest to my team on Slack. And I make sure they're able to track that scorecard week after week. And we get a score of pass, fail, or in the end of every quarter, and we talk about it. We talk about it in all hands. There's visibility, and it's a good environment. It scales. I think there's different mechanisms to scale it, but the culture itself scales.
Makes sense. And to that point, do you folks use those metrics, specifically business metrics, scorecards, in your performance management? How does kind of loaded question, but how do people react to that? Maybe Gil.
Yeah.
First. go down.
Yeah, I think it's something we have to be careful about. Kind of like Amit said earlier, it just, and honestly, Rukmini as well, it doesn't paint the full picture. So not everyone is necessarily having the same impact on the business, especially the metrics that, it's not that not everyone's having the same impact on the business, I hope everyone is, but not everyone's having the same impact on those metrics you're tracking. So just because someone isn't, increasing bottom line ARR, someone isn't, increasing retention by adding new features, that doesn't mean that their work isn't valuable. So we have to stretch and recognize those people who are keeping our infrastructure alive and, just kind of helping maintain our services, helping, add new internal processes that make us better but aren't necessarily as directly attributable to those business metrics.
Cool. The other topic I definitely want to talk about is just retention, right? Obviously, I think talent is still very, very hard to come by, regardless of the environment, right? We're always going to need more developers and engineers. To that point, maybe Rukmini, what are some key things that you guys are doing around, just key retention metrics you're tracking to ensure the health of the team?
I say the cheapest engineer to hire are the ones we already have, so don't lose them. I think more so in the last year, I've had a pretty good retention rate, and I think it just comes down to, are people feeling like they're doing the best work of their lives on any given day? Do they understand what they're moving for the business? Can they tie their work back to how the business is growing? And secondly, I think there's a lot of the same, everyone has scale, everyone offers technical complexity. So what differentiates you as an organization? And I think for me personally, I've indexed on culture and transparency and ability to make change, which most engineers don't find everywhere else. So one of the things I do is I run a pulse on my organization, and I have every 3 months since I got here. And it's again a culture of you signed up to share information, and I ask questions like, do you trust me to do a good job as your leader up front? And I take all the feedback they give, and I conduct retrospectives on not just incidents, but even bad technical decisions we made, because we all make bad technical decisions at some point, so we revisit them and talk about them. So creating a culture of that, and also most importantly, I think offering mobilization for engineers within the organization is key. Sometimes people don't want to get off the bus, they just want a different seat. So maybe talking to them, normalizing internal movement to other teams where they may feel more passionate about, or they're burnt out on their current team. All these things have really helped us retain more engineers.
Thoughts, Amit?
Yeah, so I think I personally identify myself as an engineer, and so I can talk about what engineers care about. And in my opinion, they mostly care about a few things, right? A, do they have a platform to do the best work of their life? And are they being supported to do that? B, the work that they're doing, is that being appreciated? And C, are they learning and growing so that they are much better suited later on, right? So these are the few things that are really important to measure. And what we have done is we use a tool called OfficeWide that periodically sends out surveys and asks people different kinds of questions, and the answers are both qualitative and quantitative, right? So on a scale of 1 to 10, how well do you feel appreciated? And then a text box saying what made you feel appreciated or not. And they kind of come up with their own questions, and they do a good job, and we get both the qualitative and quantitative picture over there. It has done a good job for us to keep the pulse on the organization, understand where the pain is, where the concerns are, and what to do to address them. Yeah.
Yeah, I think a couple other things for us. Agree with everything here. It's obviously important for people to learn and grow and feel appreciated and understand their impact. Couple other things. One, obviously compensation. We're just not going to lose someone to compensation, especially we're small. We don't try to compete against Facebook, but we are not going to lose someone to another company of our size over comp. So we're always giving raises before anyone ever comes to us. That's just obviously table stakes. But then I think the other one for us is one-on-ones. We have a very specific question we always ask, which is not, how are you doing, what's going well, what's not. It's name one thing that you think is the worst for you, and name one thing that you would improve right now if you could, because it forces someone to say something negative. Not that we want people to be overly negative, but we really don't want people roasting on something that went wrong, and letting that just build up inside of them until they want to leave. So catching things really early and just being able to recognize patterns, fix things across the org, and keep people happy, because often you have someone leave for some little nitpicky thing that's just easily solvable if they would just speak up about it.
Yep. Makes sense. I know we're a little time constrained. We can talk about this all the time, but the other part I want to touch upon is obviously the tools that you guys are using or leveraging, whether third party or first party. In your venture community, obviously a lot of money has gone into DevOps, and we joke about how there's always a last frontier of DevOps out there, and it seems like engineering productivity could be one of those. Curious to get your thoughts on those. Maybe we can start with Rukmini.
Yeah, I've used various tools. I think last I used was Code Climate Velocity or something like that. We've also built internal data warehouses, custom reports. My favorite tool of all is Google Sheets. I really like it. I feel like it's low-key. It lets me customize whatever I need to. I like Poly, like to do surveys, to quantitative and qualitative surveys. Anything that's integrated with Slack works for me. So I think, again, any tool is as good as the context you're trying to derive and why you're using it. Most tools offer very similar pros and cons. I personally enjoyed Code Climate Velocity. I found their dashboards easy. I was able to set up goals for the organization and measure. But again, I haven't tried any of the new ones like Jellyfish and things like that yet.
No, Amit, I know you built a pretty comprehensive in-house system to do this.
Yeah, so I'll dig in a little bit here and talk at length. So look, every company kind of is built on certain core hypotheses, and at ThoughtSpot, the core hypothesis for us is that data is most valuable when you can freely ask questions. And so our most recent chant has been dashboards are dead. And we don't want people using dashboards. And no offense to people using dashboard, but it's just that there's a better way of doing it, right? And the reason we hate dashboards is because they kind of box you into predefined notions. And the view of the world that you get from that data is essentially the view that someone thought, maybe you thought 6 months ago was relevant. And then you can't go beyond that, right? So that's why we ended up building ThoughtSpot, which is a way to either ask the questions from data using a Google-like interface, or when you start from set of data visualizations or any kind of, so instead of calling them dashboards, we call them live boards, because when you see something, you can kind of go in any direction and ask any question. And so, yes, the number of code commits were low last week, but why? Did that low volume come from one particular team not doing anything because they were on offsite? Or did it come from everybody doing 20% less because there was something going on in the company and everyone's 20% of the bandwidth was gone into dealing with that or celebrating something? Or because a particular team's tooling broke down and they were not able to check in for a while. So that's kind of one example of a dashboard will tell you what happened, but if you want to know why, you want to ask 20 relevant questions after that. And so I'm particularly proud of what we've done internally at ThoughtSpot is also that because we are able to integrate, we are kind of horizontal tools, so we are able to pull data from the check-in systems, from the CI systems, from production monitoring systems, from Salesforce, and from things like Pendo and Mixpanel. So we kind of get a comprehensive view of what's going on. Mm-hmm. And then when we look at something, we're not just kind of stuck at what happened, but we can pretty quickly drill down and get to the why of what's happening. And that's been really powerful.
Cool. I know we're a little over time. I do want to ask maybe one last question. It's just, hey, with all those systems, there's still so many things that we cannot measure, right? There's so many things in the gray area. I guess maybe we can just end with what's kind of the biggest challenge that you have and what's top of mind. Maybe we can start with Gil.
Yeah, I think Rukmini and Amit said it best, but that data is just the start of the story. It's just the kicking off point, and there's certain things that I can't name something in specific, but certain things you can't measure. And so using that data, not coming to false conclusions, being able to figure out where to take that story from the data itself is the most important. What the solution is, I don't exactly know, other than you kind of know in the moment, you know what to pursue, and you just have to ask a lot of questions.
Yeah, for me, I think the holy grail of building products is knowing kind of how to prioritize things, right? And a lot of different data can flow into your prioritization decisions, but it's really hard to get a sort of solid picture to say, okay, if I do X, this is what happens. If I do Y, this is what happens. And over the years, we've gotten more mature about collecting data. Like if we build this, X number of customers would appreciate it, and Y number of deals would have moved if we had this feature kind of thing. But that's where I feel like some of the biggest challenges lie, and some of the biggest opportunities lie if we can kind of make that a little more closer to math and less to dark art.
Cool.
I think most of us here, like I think our skill is pattern recognition at this point. I've taken everything else off my resume. That's the only thing I have in there. And what I love about being in engineering leadership is like the patterns keep coming. I keep learning new patterns. And if you ask me what's most challenging, I'm like, right now in this environment, 3 months ago, it was how do I retain my people? Now it's like, how do I keep them engaged, navigate them through like this downturn that we're seeing, in the economy. And the last 2 years have asked a lot of all of us. Like, we are everyone's coach, guide, mentor, sometimes therapist. Like, it's been a lot. So that's why I find this work exciting, because while an engineer, I don't identify as an engineer anymore. I don't think I'm qualified to do that. But it's pattern recognition, making sure people, again, you're creating an environment where a community where people feel like they can innovate, they're excited about their work, and maybe go on to build more companies themselves. I think that's what the dream is, right?
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.